welcome back, everyone, to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm Judy Weigel, your host, divorce mediator, and amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's all I do, amicable divorces. Today, we have such a special guest with us. Her name is, officially Judge Denise Gavron, but for the purposes of this podcast, it'll be Denise Gavron because she is a child of divorce. And because this podcast is devoted to all aspects of an amicable divorce, I really think the hardest part of a divorce is when there are children. And lest we think that children are only children who are minors are affected by divorce, I beg to differ. And that's why we have Denise with us. So welcome, Denise.
Good morning. Thank you.
So Denise was the only daughter of one of the most famous, noted family law cases in California history, to the extent that the point of the divorce created extended litigation. The extended litigation was surrounded on spousal support, alimony in other states, spousal support in California. Her parents are Mildred and Bernard Gavron. The case that lives on in family law that some of you may have been introduced to by your attorneys, if not, it'll be introduced to you now. It's called the Gavron warning. And the Gavron warning is this. It is a limiting of the award of spousal support, even in a long-term marriage. And if any of you have investigated spousal support thus far, there are two aspects to it. In a marriage under 10 years, it's half the length of the marriage. In a marriage over 10 years, it becomes dicey. To the full extent, it can be forever, or it can be limited in some respect. And the Gavron warning limited divorce in a long-term marriage so that the recipient spouse would be forced to, please don't think this is horrible, get a job. But for some people, that is a very difficult thing, getting a job. So I start this because we're not going to talk about her parents' case. We are going to talk about how her parents' case affected her as a child of divorce. So, Denise, it lasted 10 years. How old were you when it started? How old were you when it ended, if it ever ends?
Good point. It does never end, I'm sorry to say. I was 19 and still living at home when my dad left. I was in college and I had been saving money for 2 years to move out. You know, what teenager doesn't want to get out of the house? And I really wanted to. But with my father leaving, I think my mom said, you can't go. She was very devastated. So I stayed. So that was the initial impact. As a teenager, I was very self-centered, focused on me. My mom was a mess, but I don't think I was really focusing on them, just how it affected me and changed my plans. I saw my dad a lot because he and I both worked in Hollywood in the same city, so I would see him for lunch. My mom, of course, I lived with. As the legal battle was going on, I think I put my head more and more in the sand because it was a 10-year marathon of angry people.
How could you put your head in the sand? And this is why I asked this question. Maybe you got the emotion of it. Maybe it wasn't discussed with you. Did your mom bring it up? Did your dad bring it up? How could it not be brought up?
I guess after I would hear my mom bash my dad in every way possible, I just tried to turn that off. My dad also very angry. The two of them were so angry, so I'd have to listen to it and then just try and forget and say to myself, this is their problem, not mine, and try and move out as soon as possible. So I did, a year later.
You were 19 when you moved out?
I
How
was
old?
20.
You were 20.
I was ready at 19, but then my dad left, so I waited till 20
Where were you going to school?
at UCLA.
And did you know you wanted to go into law?
No, that really had nothing to do with the divorce. I just finished college with a sociology degree, so no real good employment options. But I needed to work, so I needed grad school at night. So law school has a night program. So that's really why I picked it. It had nothing to do with anything other than that.
And you know, when I introduced you, I didn't say that you worked in employment law, not family law.
Yes.
A conscious choice not to go into family law?
Yeah, I would never be interested in that. It's so brutal and nasty. So I would have no interest in that.
You know, that it's interesting that you say that, because the only area of law I've ever worked in, my background is in live entertainment, and family law is what I got into about 7-8 years ago. I have said it is entertainment of a whole different nature, a bit dark, but it's drama unfolding in front of your eyes. And I have also said, I think it's worse than personal injury law.
I think it's the worst because it folds in the heart and the pocketbook. What more important problems to deal with? So it's...
Absolutely. And people don't realize, nor did I until I got into this business, that the reason we go to City Hall to get a marriage license is because the state looks at it as a financial contract.
Exactly.
Correct?
Absolutely.
And that's why when people get divorced, they say, well, why does it feel like it's all about money? Because it is.
It absolutely is.
But then you're going through this huge emotional turmoil in your life, and you've got to think about money. And then if you have children, which cost money, you also have to think about the child rearing financially, and then how are you going to handle the kids? So you were not a minor, right? You had already graduated from high school?
Correct.
Okay, so so you didn't have to be engaged in the co-parenting plan at all.
Thank goodness.
A victim of. But wait a minute. You created your own time with your parents. Did they get jealous of each other and your time?
Well, unfortunately, I was put in the middle. I was made to choose sides. If I saw my dad, I couldn't tell my mom. If my dad told me something about his life, I couldn't tell her. So it was very terrible.
What was your escape? What was your outlet?
Just my own life, having my own life, going to school, working, having my own life and leaving them to their own devices. Very unpleasant.
Did you go to therapy at all?
No.
I don't know in those days, in the 70s and 80s, if therapy was as important.
Therapy was a thing, and I went for my own reasons in the 80s and 90s, but not related to that. I just sort of walled that off and said to myself, I'm never going to be a person like that. And I'd say 4 decades, they could not be in the same room. And my mother insisted that I could not invite my dad to anything. Not a birth, not a marriage, not a graduation, nothing. And that's pretty bad.
And you have a child. You have a son, correct?
Correct.
So what happened?
Well, looking back, I think foolishly let my mom get away with that. I think I should have put my foot down and said, no, I have a mom, I have a dad, and if the two of you can't be in the same room, I'm sorry. But I didn't do that. I just went with her because my dad left town, so we wouldn't have to pay support anymore. So he was sort of away, and she was the aggrieved party.
What is it like now, your relationship with each parent?
Now, I would say it's fine. My dad remarried right away, but his wife died about 8 years ago. So I was not having much communication with him because his new wife didn't allow it. So when she passed away, I reached out to him, So I have a relationship with him. My mom, I've always had a relationship with. And of course, the coup de grace is my son got married last year, and they were both in the same room.
Is that the event at the Beverly Hills? Was it at the Beverly Hills Hotel where Attorney Mitchell Port, who connected us, a former client of mine?
It wasn't at that venue, but yes, Mitch is my friend from college. I've known him all these years. So he was at the wedding, he saw the two of them, and,
How old were you when your dad remarried?
I was still, I think I was in law school by then, so I was probably 22, and I was at the wedding, and the most mortifying thing was the videographer coming up to me and asking what I would like to say to my parents. So that's my dad, it's not my mom, it's hardly even a stepmom, I'm a grown woman. Anyway.
Oh my.
Yes.
Okay, so you were 22 when your dad remarried, and you were expecting that you would be a part of their family? This is called a blended family.
I think I was expecting not to be part of it because as an only child and a loner type, I had no interest in that. But my dad and the wife tried to make that happen. The two kids were, I don't know, maybe 6 and 8, something like that.
Did she bring 2 children to the marriage? Okay.
Yes. And he supported them, sent them to private school, stopped paying for my college. So very unpleasant. So I ultimately didn't get involved in that family, and then they left the state. So
okay, so here's a very important point that you just brought up that comes up in almost every mediation when I do divorce mediations. So there's the blended family, and we'll just use father. It seems that men marry faster than women. I may be wrong, but it just seems that way, doesn't it to you?
It definitely seems that way.
Okay, so we'll take the case of a man marrying first and now really focusing on the new family. I assume logistically, because the new family is in the house, you would. But this is the trick. How do you bring in your first child or first group of children? How do you mix that together? And what did you want him to do that he didn't do?
I wanted to be left out of it.
Did you really?
Yeah, that just wasn't for me.
Okay.
The person he married was a family member, so it was not a good thing, by marriage family member that I had known my whole life. Oh. So that complicated it, and she wanted to bring me in, but she would get overly personal telling me about my dad and how he's suffered so much in his marriage to my mom. It was just totally inappropriate in my mind. So I just backed away and let him be.
Words of wisdom from you now on how to conduct a blended family. Do's and don'ts.
Well, your parent has to try and create that, not this new interloper, because that person is an interloper, especially if it's been a long-term marriage. And I think that the child has to be given some choice if they're a grown-up. Now, when they're little kids, I don't know. I just don't even know what to say about that. I can't imagine. But it's different than if you're a grown-up.
It is different. And I had a case a few years ago where I filed for a legal separation first, so that the wife could stay on the husband's health insurance. A year went by once the legal separation was granted, and then the divorce started. Since I had known him, I said, how are the 2 kids? So the 2 kids were about 8 and 9 now. I said, how are the 2 children? He said, not doing well. And I said, how so? He said, they're just not getting along with my new live-in girlfriend, who also had her own house, though, and her own young son. And he said, I'm thinking, we're bringing them into therapy. I said, well, first of all, that's great. So I'm glad that you're proactive. But what's the real issue? Just curious. And he said, they want time with me, some alone time with me. And I said, well, is that okay? Well, no, why can't my girlfriend be with us? And I said, because they have to adjust to this new life. Denise, please.
That is the immaturity of a grown man, not realizing to put the children first, whether they're minors or grown-ups. Put the children first, not your own life. You had the kids, they have to be the priority. At least that's how I see it. That may not make for the best relationship or marriage, but in my mind, the kid is the priority, and the spouse or girlfriend have to take second seat.
Right, and so there's a co-parenting plan. The children are not always with one parent. As young children, as minors, they're with both parents if there's no substance abuse issues, if they have equal visitation rights. So my message then is, well, you have time alone with your girlfriend. This isn't going to last forever. You're just getting them through whatever period they need help with. And then you slowly introduce the other partner. Make sense?
It absolutely makes sense, and I just hope that more of that is happening than the opposite.
Well, there's more therapy going on now, so people are more familiar with that. But still, I guess it's an issue of the parents kind of dealing with the emotional aspect of the divorce and getting them self-centered, and then, making sure their children are okay. This is the hardest thing in the world. I mean, how long does it, you don't know how long it's going to take you to get through your emotional issues as the spouse, parent getting divorced, but there's a lot on your plate. Now, you have been not only the child of a very contentious divorce, but you have been married, you do have a child, and you did get divorced. I'm also amazed at what you said, by the way, your independent thinking and the way you really helped nurtured yourself through your parents' divorce. So did that set you up for when it was your turn to get divorced?
I think so. I picked a man very unlike my dad. I picked a man of character, somebody who knows what's right, knows what's wrong, and lives that kind of life. So that was very soothing, refreshing. There are not that many men, it seems to me, like that. So I knew there'd be no cheating happening. And he definitely is a good man. We couldn't make it work after 12 years. It was very hard because I had my son that was not his son. I had him, he was 3 when we got married. I had not been married before. So that was difficult because my son had his dad. I had a husband. My son had a stepdad. Difficult. But in terms of divorce, of course, we didn't have to worry about my son. He was mine. That was my responsibility. We just agreed to split everything appropriately. We had both worked our whole marriage, and I wasn't going to have
So the Gavron warning was not part of your divorce, was it, Denise?
Exactly. I was going to be working. He was going to be working. Right. So no problem there. And I knew how devastating it could be. So I lost in some areas. He lost in some areas. That's just how it goes.
Yes, it does. So I want to go to your son now. So even though your son was not a son of your marriage, how old was he when you got married?
He was 3, and his father married and had a daughter. So my son also has a half-sister. I mean, she's his sister. I'm just saying half so that it's clear. So unfortunately, my son and husband didn't keep up a relationship. My son and I got our own place when my son was 15. So he didn't really have a need to connect still with the stepdad, and the stepdad apparently didn't either. So that
How did you
fell
get
apart.
along with your son's stepmother?
Fine.
Yes?
She's a good woman. At my son's wedding, I walked down the aisle myself. Then she came herself. So fine. I mean, she no problem there. And if there were a problem, I would say nothing and do nothing. I would zip my lip. You can't. That's got to work. So.
Okay, so you learned that
Absolutely.
from your parents' experience. You did learn that. Did your husband forge a relationship with your son during the marriage?
Yes. He worked very hard to do that, and he did the best he could. But when there's a real dad, a biological dad, there's a competition there. So it was very difficult for him.
Was there a competition?
I think so.
Unspoken, kind of? Or
Right. I think
obvious?
so.
Yeah.
It was difficult. It was very difficult. My husband tried. I think he did the best he could, was there.
What do you think the challenges were on both sides? Natural dad, stepdad?
To coordinate an approach. One was more of a free spirit, bohemian, hippie type.
Son's dad?
Right.
Okay.
The other, the opposite. So and I'm both. I'm both of those things. So to coordinate an approach to child rearing is pretty close to impossible.
In the house. So this is interesting because blended families, these things come up. So in the house, of course, he's going through his formative years while you're married. Discipline. How did you and your husband deal with discipline of your son?
My son never needed discipline. I just have to say there was never any time out. There wasn't any. He was a rule follower. I mean, later there were issues, but not when I was married anymore.
Okay.
So there was none of that. And if there was any decision to be made, I did it 100% myself.
Yes.
That's my kid. I'm deciding.
When you were introducing your husband and your son to people when you went out as a family, how did you refer to each of them, or did you not refer to the actual relationship between the two of them?
I don't exactly remember. I probably didn't say stepdad because it feels a little bit demeaning in our suburban world. So I probably said, this is my husband, this is my son. But of course, my son had my last name. So I don't think I identified.
Okay, that's interesting. Your son had your last name. So I work with a lot of parentage cases as well. Parentage means parents aren't married, but they still want the court's oversight for custody and child support and a co-parenting plan. So in terms of, I lost track. I forgot what I was going to say.
The last name.
The last name.
Situation.
Yes. So I am used to the father's last name being used. How was that decision between you and your son's father?
I wanted to have a child, didn't think I ever wanted to get married, so I made that happen. I didn't really consult my boyfriend, the father of my son. I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that, but that's what I did. I was a single mom, back in the 80s when there weren't any.
But he knew that he was a dad, did he? Or did
Yes,
he not?
I told him.
Okay.
And he was always a dad, but he had no steady work. So I knew I'd be in charge.
Free spirit.
Exactly.
Right.
In most ways. So I made sure that they saw each other. It was a every other weekend kind of a thing. And so I gave my son my name.
That's wonderful. That's interesting, wonderful, and it worked. So, yeah. Okay. So no issues. And when you were getting divorced, you learned from your parents' divorce and made a concerted effort to do things differently.
Absolutely.
Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, my husband and I talked out the money, and that's really all there was. You know, the house, the money, and we talked it out and had there's always some friction about it. And we had saved money for my son to go to college, and I gave back half of that because it's not his son. But I mean, I was working too, so he gave me my pension. I mean,
That
we
was
just
really nice.
Well, that's why
That's important. You gave back half of the money
Yes.
you both contributed to for your son's college. That is amazing.
Well, it was it's not his son.
That was so generous. If I may.
Well,
that was so generous, and you rose above
Yes.
the emotional friction that is just there.
Exactly. It just seemed fair. It seemed right. It seemed fair. He spent a lot of money raising my son. I thought that was enough. I mean, my money too, but so.
Okay, you've said two things that have completely amazed me in this interview, and have blown me away. You first of all talking about how you handled things as an only child. You did not have a sibling to bounce your emotions off of. You did have somebody, or did you really keep to yourself?
I think I kept to myself. That's my way. That's how I operate. That's just my being.
Okay, and then I'm completely blown away that you gave his portion of the college money back. I am used to people being generous sometimes, but fearful about money otherwise. Is it because you were both able to take care of yourselves individually?
I'm sure that's so. I mean, we're both lawyers, so we were going to have our jobs, and yeah.
What area of law did you practice?
I was an insurance defense lawyer. So
going into being a judge in employment law was just a natural step.
Right.
Okay. So you did say that you chose a man much unlike your dad. And it's interesting because sometimes choosing your dad when you think your dad's the greatest guy in the world isn't the right person for you anyway. You just have to do this. After the divorce, did you want to get married again? How long has it been since you've been divorced?
I think it's been about 16 years since we separated. We waited many years to divorce because there was really no reason to. So I think we waited like 6 years to do the divorce. We had already separated the money. We had already pretty much separated the money and the assets. No, I never thought I'd get married at all. I'm glad I did. I'm glad I experienced that world. But no, I am better on my own. So no, I never thought about that.
So I'd like you to explain something because I've never understood it, and other people have come in my office who have been separated for quite a while, anywhere from 3 years to 10 years. They never felt the need to officially. I don't understand that.
I guess in part I thought it'd be more hurtful to him. Well, for a while, no, I'm remembering, for the first couple of years, he moved to another city, but we saw each other because we weren't that angry, but we really couldn't make it work in a traditional sense, and I didn't want him to deal with my teenage son issues. So we saw each other for a couple of years, and then he was not happy with that. He wanted to be married, and he was married before me and married currently, I believe, after me. So I didn't want to make him feel bad and sad, and it just didn't matter to me. We both had our lives, our jobs, and I at that point had all the college money and didn't spend it because my son was going to community college, so I was just paying for him to do that, and I was holding on to this money because we hadn't really decided about it. He actually, after several years, finally said, I'm going to file the papers. And I said, okay. Got my own lawyer, decided to file the papers here, where I felt some control. And then
So were you the petitioner?
Yes.
Okay.
Simply out of my own control issues and convenience. And he didn't get a lawyer, but we talked everything out, and then he spoke with my lawyer, who could just write up whatever the agreement was.
Okay, so now this is another interesting point. These things come up in everybody's divorce. I was going to ask you what process you went through. So you got a lawyer. He did not. Is he living in California
Yes.
or in another state?
No, he's in California.
At the time?
Yes.
He just wasn't in Los Angeles.
Exactly.
Okay, so he's living in California, but not in Los Angeles. You got a lawyer. He did not. You probably named the date of separation years ago.
Correct.
So that you could control the community property aspect of it. So let's just stop for a second to explain to the listeners that once you name the date of separation, you are no longer creating community property in this community property state.
Exactly.
Okay, so very important to be specific about that. The other point that I love, I want to bring out, because I think this is important, because this is how a lot of divorces go. One person feels far more comfortable having an attorney, even though it's amicable and there's not going to be argument. One person will just feel more comfortable with the highest legal authority, an attorney, handling everything. And the other person doesn't feel the need. So attorneys come in two versions, Denise, family law attorneys in two versions. One type of family law attorney will converse with the other spouse who is unrepresented, and then there are attorneys who won't. Do you have any idea why this exists?
Well, it seems like there's an inherent conflict. But for me, I used an attorney that I used to work with, so it was an attorney/friend. And I just didn't want to do the paperwork. I didn't want to make a mistake. And my husband, I think, didn't want to spend the money on an attorney when it seemed to be so easy. But no, I'm not sure.
Did you direct your attorney? I think it might come from the client themselves that will take the initiative to say, no, talk to my husband or wife. It's fine. To negotiate out, this is what I would like. I think this is what he or she would like. I almost think, just listening to you and talking with you, that it has to be the client who says to their attorney, please, we would like to get this over. If this is the next step, call him or her.
Exactly. And I think what may have happened is that my husband and I had agreed to all the terms. And at the very end, I think I said to my lawyer, well, maybe he'll pay half the
legal fees.
Ask him if he will.
Did he?
And he asked him, and he did.
Oh, how nice. But what if he had said no?
Then I would have just paid.
Okay. It wouldn't have been an issue, but just to ask. So this is something else that comes up. Everything that you're mentioning comes up, at least in the divorces I experience. Asking is fine. And if the answer isn't yes, if you're looking for a yes and it's not yes, move forward, get it done, move on with your life. Yes?
Absolutely. And we're not talking big money here. This was, my lawyer spent maybe 5 hours. There was nothing to it.
It was that easy.
Yes.
There are no motions, no extra hearings, nothing like that.
Not any
just
hearing.
Paperwork.
Only paper.
And divorces can be this simple. Everybody listening, it can just be paperwork. You don't have to go to court.
Right. That's what we did.
But it's up to you how you do it. Each individual, it's up to you. And at the end of the day, even though court is there to help, and that's what I always say to people, do not use court as a weapon or a threat. The courthouse isn't moving. There will always be judges there, and they are there to help. And that's how I try and position court so that it becomes a non-issue, so the couple can focus on making decisions themselves.
Always better to make your own decisions rather than have the court make them for you.
So Denise, to wrap this up, what words of advice can you give people struggling through a divorce that have minor children? Because this was the point of this interview, is to help people who have minor children.
Put your children first. Don't make them take sides. And keep your promises to your kids.
How do you mean?
If your kids are 10 and they go to summer camp every year, make sure they still go to summer camp. Don't turn their world upside down.
How easy or hard is it to not involve your children in what you're going through emotionally as a parent?
I guess it depends on your coping skills. I guess not all humans can keep that from the kids, but the goal is to insulate them from all of it.
And it's very hard to insulate when you're living in the same house. So there is a video out there, and it's called Split, S-P-L-I-T. It's about a 35 minute video. It was produced by a woman named Ellen Bruno, who got a very contentious divorce, horrible custody battle with her only child, a daughter. She was so moved by how this affected her daughter that she wanted to help other parents really understand what their kids needed from them. Before I explain what she said in the video, what did you need as a child in divorce? So let me just say the difference between, people say children of divorce. That's after the fact. When the divorce is going on, you're in the divorce as a child, like it or not, with your parents. So what did you need as a child in that divorce?
I think for my parents to be telling me, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. We're here for you. That kind of thing. What you hear today, the parents always saying, even though we can't live together, we love you. We're there for you. I would have liked to hear that.
Excellent.
A we, even though they're splits.
Okay, that's an excellent point, because you are the child of two people, not one. And even when people go to court and I have to write up declarations for requests for orders, things like that, I say, use the word we when you're talking about your child, because it is we. So here's what the video says. It's about 6 to 8 children, ages 6 to 14, being interviewed, and all the right questions are answered that we all worry about. And the children worry about. Are they going to keep their friends? Are they going to have to move schools? What if they forget something and they're in the other parent's house and they have a test the next day, right?
Yeah.
This is all very stressful. And the children all said, every age, yes, we worried about all of that. But after everything was sorted out and the routine was in place, we accepted everything. The only thing we needed was for our parents to get along. That's it. It's the hardest thing in the world, because the parents are going through their own emotional drama, sorting it out. They've never been there before, conceivably. This is their first divorce. And you have no guides. It's the Wild West of emotions, right?
Exactly.
And it's just so hard. So parents, this is the toughest thing in the world, correct, Denise?
Absolutely. Get along.
But you're going to have to, at the end of this, try it sooner rather than later, because nobody's a criminal. Of course, unless you are, but nobody's a criminal. because you're getting divorced, because you fell out of love, because you may have had an affair. You're not a criminal. You're just doing the best you can as a human being.
Agreed.
Denise, thank you so much. This was perfect. I loved meeting you. And I hope everybody else got a lot out of this interview.
Thank you.
This is Judy Weigel, Constructive Uncoupling. I really appreciate the time you spent with me, and we will be back next week with another episode.